Everybody. So this is a review for our final exam. It'll be due on Saturday. You'll have till 11:59 p.m. to finish it up. When we talk about interest group activity, it's going to be generally regulated, and interest groups have to report, and lobbyists have to report money that they donate. And kind of all of this is protected by the First Amendment. All right. So, lobbyists have a requirement to report how much money they spend, and they also are protected with these lobbying things by the First Amendment. Know the types of interest groups: single issue interest groups, trade association interest groups, just the generalities of that. And as everything, like we talked about, that activities protected by the First Amendment. Now, when we talk about interest groups at a pluralistic point of view, they consider them good because they provide an effective voice for citizens, they reduce anxiety among the masses, and they also provide an element of stability within the political system because it kind of ties us together with um, the kind of the candidate and the citizen. All right. Now, when we talk about labor movements, labor unions are also kind of examples of interest groups. Labor unions have really declined. The membership has really declined in the past few years, and now that most of your labor unions are going to be within the government, and they're only about 13% of the population. All right. SEIU, the Teamsters, UAW are all pretty strong labor unions. SEIU is one of the bigger ones here in San Diego, Service Employee International Union, and they have members that are hotel workers, social workers. A lot of different types of jobs are protected by that union. When we talk about single issue interest groups, remember, single issue interest groups are really effective. Things like the NRA or MAD or Emily's List, because the members are going to be really committed to their cause. So always kind of keep that in mind. And when we want to have kind of, be able to make some strides within an interest group, you must first get access from to decision makers. So that's kind of where some of the kind of the criticisms interest groups are, is that members of Congress will pay attention more to special interest groups as opposed to citizens because they have that access and they also have money, right? So access is the most important thing. Being able to have a cell phone number of a member of Congress, or their chief of staff or whatever. So, and that's why a lot of former members of Congress will become lobbyists or members of interest groups, because they'll have those personal contacts with decision makers. And lobbyists will also give information about their expertise on issues, where certain demographic groups stand on an issue, and they also are very familiar with the legislative process. And we have examples of grassroots mobilization where some movements start at the very bottom, and maybe kind of trying to get into a lobbyist, or a lobbyist trying to get in a member of Congress's kind of view, so they know that they may need some type of assistance, or they may even provide some type of assistance, because one of the biggest things that a lobbyist can do is they can give campaign contributions, and that's a big deal. And Obama got like $30 million from SEIU in 2008, and if SEIU had a labor issue that they probably had to deal with, Obama would probably picked up the phone, and that's pretty common with every president that we have, or every member of Congress that we have. And like we said, they need to report how much money they contribute to candidates or members of Congress. And lobbying is going to take place in all of levels of government, except for probably the judicial branch, since the judicial branch is probably some ethics things tied to it. Congress, executive agencies, state legislatures all are lobbied. And when we even talk about kind of, where a lot of lobbying and donations that are coming toward the Democratic Party, a lot of it comes from labor unions and lawyers. The Republican Party will generally rely on things like real estate, insurance, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, and that. Let's go down to chapter 8. So know that incumbency usually incumbents who are people who are already elected usually have the ability to be reelected more often. They have a name recognition. They usually have things that they could use, such as the congressional post office, and they can talk to the press. So, it's kind of where, a lot of the advantages that lobbyists have. When we talk about committees are usually the gatekeeper of the legislation. They can, debate amendments to a bill. They can rewrite bills. They can, in a sense, be a little bit as a conduit between the legislative branch and maybe the president. So, conference committee is a very important thing. And the committees kind of, like I said, act as the gatekeeper. Know what a filibuster is. Filibuster's been in a lot of the news lately. And the only way to end a filibuster is through something called cloture. And that means you have 60 senators that agree to not hear a case. I mean, you have 60 senators that want to end debate on legislation. So once that 60 criteria is achieved, then a vote could be conducted. But if Congress doesn't have 60 votes to end debate, then somebody can effectively talk a bill to death. And that's what we mean by a filibuster. And take a look at the filibuster video that I posted in the week 4 section under the lecture with the lecture videos. Kind of going back to committees, like I said, know what committees and subcommittee chairpersons do. They kind of act as the gatekeeper. They select what bills to consider. They'll establish the agenda. They'll select what issues the public will hear. And it's, a really prestigious job and a very important job. And when we talk about, kind of that legislative process, most amendments to bill are going to come through the floor vote. And that's the time where people debate and try to get the bill passed or to deny the bill. It's all of the amendments are going to take place at the floor vote. And when we talk about revenue bills, a bill can generally start in either the Senate or the House. But if it's a revenue bill by the Constitution, it has to start in the House. All right. So just remember that any bill can start in either chamber unless it's a revenue bill. Revenue bill has to start in the House. Now, when you look kind of at the differences between the House and the Senate, usually the Senate is considered to be more prestigious. They have that filibuster. House of Representatives doesn't. They approve all nominees that the president puts out there. And that's an important thing because the president also kind of has to appease the senators to get their candidate through the office. I mean, through the confirmation process. Know that the ultimate congressional power over the president is the threat of impeachment. We've seen instances where 3 presidents have been impeached. One has been impeached twice. But none of them have been removed from office. So no president has been removed from office, something that's kind of important. And know who the president pro temp is. The president pro temp presides over the Senate when the vice president is not there. Remember that the vice president is the president of the Senate. Okay, let's talk about chapter 9. So what's an executive order? Basically, an executive order is a directive from the president to the executive branch to carry out some type of initiative. All right, so it's kind of an order that the bureaucracy, whether it's Social Security, FBI, CIA, any of those kind of executive offices, they have to follow the president's directive. Now it's subject to checks, right? The system of checks and balances. The courts can determine whether or not an executive order is constitutional. When we talk about the president's functions, the president's function is to, in a sense, propose policy initiatives, even though they can't directly sponsor bills, try to influence the system and supervise the government and the economy. Remember, the president is kind of the CEO over the bureaucracy. Know the checks that Congress can do to the president. They can override the president's veto with 2/3 vote. And that's a very difficult thing. It's so difficult that a president's veto has only been overridden a handful of times. I think 4% in the history of our country has a president's veto been overridden. And it's happened to each president at least once. All right. The president presents programs to Congress through things like town hall meetings, the State of the Union address, news conferences, and so on, trying to keep the public involved and in tune to what's going on in government. And remember that executive orders, they have the force of law. They can be found unconstitutional. And they direct the agencies to carry out the president's policies. All right. When we talk about the president, and a lot of people kind of look at the president's real power is the power to persuade people, to get them to buy in their agenda. The president isn't necessarily the leader of the party, but they're kind of seen as the de facto leader. They're not the official leader. So, for example, Biden is not the head of the Democratic Party. Tom Perez is. All right. Trump wasn't the leader of the Republican Party. Romney McDaniel is. So just kind of get that idea into all of your thoughts. When we talk about that concept of impeachment, remember the House will issue articles of impeachment, and then the Senate will try. The Senate will kind of act as the jury, with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court acting as the main judge. And know the formal powers of the president, like we said, supervising the executive branch, recommending policies, granting pardons. But one thing it's not leading the party. So we want to make sure of that. And the president has been found to have absolute immunity from civil suits that arise out of their official duties. All right. So say, for instance, the president does some type of action that is within the scope of their job duties. If they are outside of their job duties, so say, for instance, it's like some type of sexual harassment case, then they're not immune from civil cases. So just kind of keep an eye on that, or keep that open. Just remember that the president can't be sued if they're within their scope of their job duties, and that's kind of like a lot of what we have in other professions here. I know it's just not the president. A lot of things that we have protection if we're within our own scope of our job duty. So just kind of remember that. Okay, let's talk about the courts. The courts are going to be separated from the other branches of government because they wanted to be able to have an independent judiciary. All right, judiciaries are needed to be that independent arbitrator that we have in disputes between people. Know the federal court system, know the district courts at the very bottom, the Circuit Court of Appeals in the middle, and the U.S. Supreme Court at the top. In any given year, the Supreme Court gets about 8,000 appeals, but they hear anywhere from 150 to 200 cases. So they have what's called discretionary review, meaning that 4 justices, if they want to hear a case, they can issue what's called a writ of certiorari, and that is the order where it is a mandate given to other courts to kind of give the Supreme Court all the documentation they had in making a decision in the case that's being appealed. Know that you have to exhaust all your appeals before you get to the before you can appeal a case to the Supreme Court, meaning that you have to exhaust all the court avenues that you have. Know the jurisdiction of the court. There's about 5 or 6 things that um, the court is responsible for. So, like for example, if I commit a federal crime, like either a drive-by shooting, a hate crime, or maybe bank robbery, transporting drugs, those are all federal crimes. And if I commit a crime like that, I'll be in federal court. Prosecuted by the Department of Justice. And also, it's just not criminal. You could sue civilly and it'd be heard in Supreme in the federal court. So, say for instance, if I wanted to sue a resident of Arizona, I would have to do it in federal court. If I wanted to sue a state, I'd have to do it in federal court. Just know the basic jurisdictions. Know what an amicus curiae is. Basically, that is a brief that gives the Supreme Court an idea how an interest might be affected by their decision. So, say for instance, we have a gun rights case. The Supreme Court may ask the NRA for an amicus curiae, kind of their take on how the case should be decided. So, just kind of giving an interest, the ability to determine, to tell how a Supreme Court's decision would affect them. So we talked a little bit about 200 cases are heard by the Supreme Court each year. Know the concept of judicial activism versus judicial review. The belief in judicial activism versus judicial restraint. Sorry, I said judicial review, but I meant judicial restraint. Judicial activism is when the court goes out and tries to shape constitutional meaning to meet everyday needs. Judicial restraint is the concept when a court waits for a case to come to them instead of them going out and looking for cases. All right, so there's kind of different schools of thought with that. Know what stare decisis is. Stare decisis means let the decision stand. So that is an example of maybe some type of precedent. So if we're talking about abortion rights cases, that would be a precedent case. Roe versus Wade would be precedent. And kind of going along with that judicial restraint, that's kind of where we get number 39 and talk about an original intent. Judicial restraint, people who practice judicial restraint tend to be what are called originalists, or maybe looking at the Constitution or trying to analyze what the founding fathers intended when they wrote the Constitution. Like I said, know who Obama appointed to the Supreme Court, know who Trump appointed to the Supreme Court. Obama appointed Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. Trump appointed 3, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Know what Roe versus Wade is? There's going to be a trick question. The Supreme Court decided in Roe versus Wade that we have a constitutional right to privacy, not necessarily a constitutional right to abortion. It's a constitutional right to privacy that was established in a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. No, Plessy versus Ferguson, that established the separate but equal doctrine. Segregation was found to be constitutional, but it, along with the concept of being separate but equal. Know what the Fed is and how the Fed kind of backs money here in the United States. Know what capital gains tax, where it's a tax you pay on an investment you make where you make a profit. Know about regulations and they affect our businesses. Generally, when we have some type of regulation, it's usually passed on to the consumer or to the employee or whatever. And know some bureaucracies. I know I spelled it wrong here, but know some bureaucracies. Social Security, Veterans Affairs, FBI, Bureau of Land Management. So those are all examples of bureaucracies. Know how many levels of government there are. There's usually about 86,000 different types of governments here in the United States. You know, we have federal, state, and local, and most are going to fall under the local level. Like I said, don't worry about chapter 14. On chapter 13, just know the different types of feminism, postmodern, equity, and just be able to define those. Know what Martin Luther King's nonviolent doctrine was, or nonviolent ideas. Draw attention to unjust treatment so it couldn't be ignored. And kind of that goal of civil disobedience, and kind of going back to feminism, kind of skip this. Feminist efforts in the 1800s were kind of promulgated based off of men going out and drinking, gambling, visiting prostitutes, hitting their spouses. So it's kind of something that spurned the feminist movement during that time. And lastly, you know what the Patriot Act was? Remember, the Patriot Act was passed overwhelmingly, and it was a really kind of a weird situation where we had like a 360-page law that was passed in less than a month. So it's just some real strange things going there. So it's whittling down more civil liberties that we are supposed to have. All right, so this is what I got. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Okay, thank you.